Hello, investing friend of financial freedom. Welcome into Investors Club. Got a great show for you. Do you want to compound at high rates of return to make $1 billion? I'm sure you do, but if you don't, you should want to. Wait till you see what we got for you today. Compounding and high rates of return, a preview of the book you can get for free in the description. Get it right now. Compounding. You may have heard of the fable. You hear about the king that made a deal with this trader to place a single grain of rice on the first square of a chessboard and then double it on the second square and so on. And by the time, you know how many grains of rice you have? By the time you get to the 64th square, one doubled 64 times is 9.2 quintillion grains of rice. 9.2 quintillion grains of rice. So that is just to illustrate the power of compounding. I want to get you excited about the power. Then comes the power of compounding. So when we don't have to double every year, 20% takes us to the promised land. If you start with $100,000, compound at 20% a year, in 51 years, you have $1,092,000,000. Good enough. And 20% is achievable, as Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, and a number of others have shown us. So Buffett compounded at 20.8% for a long time. And now he used a small amount of leverage, but he had a lot of money to manage. So unless you have hundreds of billions to manage, you're not. We have many more opportunities. And so I want to get you excited about the power of compounding is amazing. And then also there's the idea of there's returns. So if we're going to get these high rates of return, let's talk about these returns and what wonderful business can get us these high rates of return and what we're looking for with these high rates of return. So let's talk about what a wonderful business is that can give us these high rates of return. So returns, the ideal business, says Warren Buffett, who compounded at 20.8% for a long, long time. The ideal business is one that earns very high returns on capital and that keeps using lots of capital at those high returns. That becomes a compounding machine. And then he tells a story of a wonderful business that does this, and we're about to see that. But so the idea is you invest in the business, and so I'll show it in this story. It's illustrated in this story. A man buys a weighing machine. So Mr. Buffett tells a story of a wonderful business. So a man buys a weighing machine. People can weigh for $100. People can weigh themselves for a penny, and after a year, he's got $33. So there's our example of the returns. There's a $33 return on his $100 investment. So a 33% return. That's a high rate of return. Anything above 15% is a high rate of return. 15 or above is a high rate of return. And so, okay, so this guy, but he doesn't spend his money. After 1 year, he's got $33, but he doesn't take it out. He leaves it in the business. And after 3 years, he has $100. So he buys a second machine. So he doesn't pay out a dividend to himself. He leaves the money in the business, and after 3 years, he has $100, and he buys a second machine. So now he's making $66 a year. So again, he reinvested at 33% returns. Soon he buys a third machine, then a fourth. Eventually, he has 1,000. So it takes him. So he buys a third machine after a year and a half because he's making $66 now, right? And then a year later, now that he's three machines, he's making $100 a year. So he buys a fourth machine after just 1 year, and now he's making $100 less than a year, and then quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker, and soon he has 1,000 machines. Eventually, he has 1,000 machines and is making $33,000 every year on his original $100 investment, compounding capital at its finest. So there's two main parts to that. One is that high rate of return, but the other one is not thought of as often, and that is the ability to reinvest at that high rate of return for a long time, for 1,000 machines worth. So we're looking for businesses just like that one, high rates of return, and then the ample opportunities to reinvest at those high rates of return for a long time. And leadership that basically doesn't mess it up. Leadership, you want to listen to people talk about returns on their investment and things like that when they're talking about deploying capital. You want them hip to this idea that you want to invest at high rates of return for as long as you can, and you want them to talk about that. So as we can see, high rates of return are incredibly important. How do we know? Okay, I'm on board. I'm hip to this. You've sold me on this high rates of return because you've sold me on the compounding. I want $1 billion on my 100,000 investment. So I do want to compound at 20%, slightly better than 20% for 50 years. So how do I know if I want to buy a stock? How do I know if a company has a high rate of return? Well, looking at the return on invested capital metric. There's a metric called return on invested capital. It's usually the best to look at. The Guru Focus, here we see MasterCard's lusty return on invested capital. So we're about to see a second part here, because MasterCard's return on invested capital, 44, 41, 43, 40, 41, 41, 46, 42, 41, 43, 45. Holy cow. That's better than our guy in our story who had a 33% rate of return. However, and then also, by the way, with some financials, return on equity can be better. But anyway, I'm going to jump to a later part here so we can keep talking about that. So, but what about the ample opportunities for reinvestment? So with MasterCard, they've got that 45% returns when they reinvest. But the second part is not just a high rate of return when you're investing. The second part is ample opportunities to reinvest. Are they able to take all of their earnings and sink it into a high return reinvestment? And the answer for MasterCard is no. And so remember, that's the two big things: high rate of return, but the ability to reinvest a lot at that high rate of return. So what about the ample opportunities for reinvestment part? How do we know how much a company can reinvest at those high rates? Like, how can you tell MasterCard doesn't have an opportunities to reinvest all of its money at those high rates? It could be that they have high rates of return, but few opportunities to reinvest, like MasterCard. Or after 1,000 machines, our guy with the weighing machines, he runs out of street corners and there's nowhere else to put. He can't reinvest anymore. So how do you know when that happens? The short answer is we don't want capital return to us. So if they're paying you a dividend, it's because they can't reinvest at high rates of return. If they're buying back share and increasing your proportional share, it's because they can't find a high rate of return to reinvest in. If they're paying off debt, then it's because maybe their debt is 8%. Well, if they had a 35% rate of return, they just invest in that instead of paying off the debt, unless they were distressed. So the answer is you don't want them doing any of those things. So debt is not usually talked about. It's sometimes talked about as a form of returning capital to shareholders. And in this case, it kind of fits in there. If they're doing dividends, if they're doing buybacks, if they're repaying debt, then they're not investing at high rates of return. And so, that's along the short of it. So that's what we're looking for. And then, so like with MasterCard, you could let's just to keep it simple and say MasterCard was trading for 20 times earnings. So that's a 5% earnings yield, 20 times earnings, a 5% earnings yield. And let's just say its dividend was 2.5% that it was paying. And let's say it did not buy back share or pay off debt. So half of its earnings are being reinvested. So you can take half of its earnings and multiply it by that return. And so you basically just cut the returns in half. And that is how you can do that. So anyway, and is that okay? So high rates of return and ample opportunities to reinvest at high rates of return. Got it. So keep it simple. High rates of return, ample opportunities to reinvest at high rates of return. Got it. Anything else? Well, yes, free cash flows. Those are the high rates of return means high rates of earnings return on your investment. But notice it's not high rates of free cash flow return on your investment. So you always want to look at your company's free cash flow conversion. So how much of their earnings, their net income is converted to free cash flow. And then also don't forget stock-based compensation. A lot of companies have big, great-looking free cash flow because they pay people in shares. So you want to look at it on a free cash flow per share basis after stock-based compensation is like the best, generally speaking, the best measure of earnings. So take that return metric and then convert it to your free cash flow, or just do it with me, have me do it for you. So anyway, okay, anything else? Yes. Yesterday we talked about how these AI companies, all these tech companies, they expense their stuff in the P&L. So the profits and loss, meaning that if they're hiring a lot of software engineers to write a bunch of code to create a great application that might create earnings for them for decades, a lot of times you never see it in the accounting. So it's like, no, they should have something that shows up on the balance sheet as this wonderful asset that throws off all these earnings. And in the old economy, when you had a mill or a plant, it did. Now they pay these people, and a lot of times, depending on how they account for it, a lot of times it just goes away, as if you were paying somebody to, sweep up the place for a day or whatever. And so they build this wonderful code that can go on forever, and it's not really accounted for in the accounting. Okay, so that's something else to look for. So remember, we talked yesterday about R&D. So some companies break out their R&D, and so you can really add that back to the earnings. So take the net income, add back the R&D, subtract the stock-based compensation, and then, start with the free cash flow, add back start with the free cash flow, add back the R&D, subtract the stock-based compensation, and look at that on a free cash flow on a per share basis over time. So that's the best earnings metric we're saying. I know this is getting complicated, sorry, but that's the best earnings metric over time. Free cash flow is the money you get to keep, and then also the R&D can dampen earnings and free cash flow. So add that back in, and then take out stock-based compensation, because it can make free cash flows look better than they are. And then look at that on a per share basis, and look at that over time. All right, we'll talk about this a lot. So that is the long and the short of it. If you want more of this stuff, this is an excerpt from the book. Get it for free. And I'm also updating the book and to make it the treatise on outperformance, which is coming. All of this stuff, but also more. We're going to couch it in the statistical, the data around outperformance, and then just incorporate all of these wonderful concepts that fit exactly right in. But the point is, you can outperform. There's a lot of managers of money that are using these studies that show that funds don't outperform, and they're saying, see, you can't outperform. But if we look a little closer, we'll see, oh, wait a minute, these funds have all these other incentives to, for example, amass as much money as possible. So as soon as they get successful, they amass there's other studies that show this, they amass so much money, it takes all the alpha away. And then suddenly, there's money managers saying you can't outperform, just index. No, you and I, individuals, can outperform, and the funds don't want us to know that. And there's data that backs it up. So that's what we're going to start with, and then talk about all these wonderful concepts about how to outperform. And I can't wait to get going with you. All right, I will see you guys in the Discord. Have a great holiday weekend. Happy Independence Day. See you in the Discord.